Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I'm making another video where I'm going to talk about Trails of Cold Steel. For this video, I'm going to be talking about Trails of Cold Steel 2. It's just a general spoiler discussion. I'm just going to be talking about some stuff about the game as a whole, you know, character stuff, some story stuff. Like I mentioned, it is going to be spoilers. It's pretty much, you know, going to be the same thing as when I talked about Trails of Cold Steel 1, which is interesting to say that considering the fact that those videos haven't even gone up yet. I mean, one of them is actually up. It just hasn't uploaded yet because I keep rescheduling it. That's kind of a behind the scenes thing, but regardless, you know, so if you haven't played all the way through Trails of Cold Steel 2, do not listen to this because I will spoil things. I might mention some stuff here and there in comparison to 3, but in general I'm going to try to keep it to 2 and make comparisons to stuff about 1, but I will get there soon enough in the grand scheme of things. But nevertheless, some things right off the bat I should also mention. It's so interesting how 2 is structured, and part of me wonders, you know, I haven't seen anything before. I've seen like 2 videos, but it's always been like character stuff and nothing like spoiler related heavily to Trails of Cold Steel 4. But obviously like 1 and 3 kind of mimic each other in just the way the story is structured, like how you spent like a couple months at Thor's in both cases, and then just like the way the story is structured. It's, you know, the way it's divided up into chapters is a little bit shorter in comparison, because like 1 is 7 chapters, 3 is what, 5? Yeah. But regardless, my point is like, because 2 is only technically like, it's 3 acts, but each of the acts is kind of like, in particular like 2 is the longest of all the acts. But obviously there's some in-between stuff. Then you have like the epilogue and a little bit of a thing. We'll go ahead and say it, you know, Lloyd and Rixia. So it's like, that's kind of, you know, but that's, you know, but even like another thing I think is kind of interesting is like, where it's like 1 and 3 take place over the course of like 6 months, basically. The events of the entirety of 2 90% of 2 takes place over the course of a single month, which is interesting because like the time frame between 1 to 2 is a month, and the entire game takes place over a month. I think that's kind of interesting. They never really get into it, like, because obviously the whole point at the end of 1 is Celine telling Valimar to take Rean as far away as possible. And they get to, what is it that, God, I'm a butcher it. It's the place that Rean wakes up. I'm butchering it. It's something, it's an E-word range. Because it's interesting because Rean knows the place, because it's like, oh yeah, my master took me up here to train for like a month. I don't think he brings that up immediately. I think that comes up in like someone else's bonding event. I want to say it's one of Laura's bonding events. He talks to her about the fact is that him and his master spent like a month up there, you know, for Rean's training. But it's just so interesting that it picks such a spot, because that place, I mean, part of me was wondering is, did Valimar kind of pick it specifically? Because obviously it's like in the opposite direction of Trista. It's just, you know, it's like Valimar flew as far as he could with as limited amount of energy as he had left to in a particular direction. Also had to make sure he had enough conserved energy to make sure that he took care of Rean. I mean, he had to make sure that Rean recharged Rean's life for an entire month, because that's why like Valimar has such low mana for such a large chunk of the game, because for one, the mana he does manage to restore in that amount of time, because I mean that is it when you actually break that down and think, because at any time Valimar is only resting for like a couple hours at a time. Well, because it's sometimes hard to tell like how much time is really passed by in certain cases, because like obviously the date will stay stuck on one particular date, but in between on some occasions it's like, well, you went out looking for your classmates, so you might have been going maybe like a day or 2, but it just all seems like it might have taken place over the course of a single day. And I think in some instances they kind of show that it's taking place over the course of multiple days, but regardless, it's like, so Valimar never really has 100% time to really like fully recharge, especially because you're using the spirit paths, and that chalks up a lot of uses up a lot of his mana in itself. But regardless, I like how the game starts, and I think once again this is something interesting that I'm curious, is 4 going to have this, but 1 and 3 start off with a cold open epilogue. I mean prologue. Well, not even a cold open, because the cold open is separate from the prologue. I keep forgetting that, in the sense that because obviously in 1, when you start off the game, you start off at Corellia Fortress. That's something you don't, those are events that you don't get to till much later in the game. And 3 does a similar thing. We'll talk about that when we get to 3. But I think it's interesting that 1 just literally starts. I mean, it's not like it starts immediately. I mean, 2 starts not immediately afterwards. Obviously, like I said, it takes place a month, but like, you jump right into the prologue. There is no code open like there is the other games. You know, so I just thought that was just kind of an interesting aspect to it. Regardless, the whole point I was also making was just like, I wondered if Valimar choose that particular place, not only just to get far away, but also because it was relatively close. Like, you know, Reen being his own, because they've never dived into it. Like, it doesn't seem like Valimar knows what Reen knows. It's just kind of like, it's not like they have a connection, and obviously it gets stronger over the course of the game to the point that even later on there's a telepathic communication it can do, but it's not like a thing where Valimar knows everything that Reen does. Valimar is kind of more like, I think more like Reen's weapon, because, like, you know, I think a lot of swordsmen, I don't know if they don't say this necessarily in Trails when it comes to swordsmanship, but a lot of stuff kind of references swordsmanship as kind of being like your weapon is supposed to be not just an object, it's supposed to be an extension of yourself. They never really say that in Trails, but I hear that sometimes when it comes to swordsmanship and stuff like that in other fictions and stuff like that. But so, because like Valimar is kind of an extension of Reen, so he knows what Reen does. Like, all of Reen's training, because of the way the whole, you know, Divine Knight, you know, I mean, mechs in general, Soldats in general, are kind of operated. They're an extension of you. You know, that's beside all the point and everything. I just thought it was just kind of interesting, because it's like, I don't think Valimar knew that Ymir is like where Reen grew up and stuff like that until Reen probably talked to him more about it and everything. That, I mean, obviously at this time too, Valimar has very limited speech as well, because like, I mean, because also you can't forget, once again, Reen went straight into his first Divine Knight battle after awakening his Divine Knight, like, what, a day or so prior? Well, I mean, Valimar got unlocked like a day or so prior, but, you know, it was like, you know, immediately after calling Valimar's name, you jump into your first battle with him too. So, you know, that has to kind of be considered as well. I thought it was kind of interesting how you start off though, like how Reen is kind of giving Celine the cold shoulder, because obviously for him, he's so upset because it's like, I've been asleep for a month. I have no idea what happened to my friends. It's all your fault. And he's blaming her, but eventually he kind of realizes it's not her fault, because if anything, if he had stayed there to fight, he would have died. That Celine doing what she did was the best action. Yeah, there's a little bumpy road at the beginning between them, but eventually it's to the point where Reen goes, you know what, I was wrong, and you know, he realizes that Celine does what she does because she cares about it. She can be very like, very blunt and very harsh at times, but that's because she's secretly hiding the fact is that she really does care. Like, obviously the whole human thing kind of eludes her a little bit at the beginning, but obviously as time goes on, like, they start kind of wearing her down, you know, because obviously the entire time she's like, oh, I'm not really that worried about Emma, but when in actuality she's super worried about Emma. It's kind of neat because it's like, you never actually go to Ymir in 1, but once again, there's that little section in between 6 and 7, you know, chapter 6 and 7, where you go to Ymir, like the entirety of class 7. Once again, that's the Japanese like drama CD, but it's mentioned in the game, but you don't get to experience it. But it's like, this is your first time being in Reen's hometown, the snow. I like that being a snowboarding aspect to it, and I also like that they do make a whole point of like everyone in town being like, oh my god, Reen. I mean, to be fair, he's like the Baron's son, so obviously he's going to be a little bit of a celebrity anyway. Actually, I like it because like there's one of the people that works in a church, she likes to think of herself as kind of like a big sister to Reen or something. Then there's the other one that's kind of like his best friend from Ymir, he's the dude who runs what's the word I'm looking for? It's the gondola isn't the right word. I don't know what I'm thinking of. It's the thing that you can take up and down to the town that like takes you to like below the mountain. That whole thing. Is gondola the word I'm looking for? I know. I'm probably not. Regardless, that's beside the point. I just like a lot of Reen's relationship with the characters. There's also the 2 maids that work at the Phoenix Wings, because like eventually it gets to the point that she, like, because I think Maple's the one with blue hair, right? I can't remember. The one that's got brown hair constantly brings up that the other one who's kind of got bluish hair, that No, that's, yeah, because that's purple. Maple's the one with brown hair, but purple, like, she has like big boobs, but apparently she ties them down, and that becomes like a whole thing. Like when you check back into Ymir, she makes a whole point about like it's so unfair. It's like, oh, she doesn't gain any weight. It's like, wait, dude, does her weight go to her boobs? And it's just like purple's like, I hate that, you know, Maple keeps bringing it up all the time because it makes me super uncomfortable. You know, because obviously a lot of times you can come back to Ymir to well, obviously over the course of the beginning, especially in chapter 1, because you have to go back to Ymir like after every so often to check up on your dad and everything, as well as, you know, regroup and everything. But then eventually, obviously, you get to the point you can kind of pop back to Ymir, like every so often, new dialogue presents itself, new quests and stuff like that. Like I talked about it in one, how like I couldn't remember her name before, but obviously, like, I remember it now. Patiri and the little kid that's always with her, like, they ended up getting separated. Like I said, he ends up in Legram and she ends up in Ymir. They made a mistake, ended up in the wrong places, and you reunite them, that being a quest and stuff. Because it starts with the kid in Legram, and, you know, Machias, like I said, figured out that, like, oh, you were looking at the map from opposite sides. Regardless, I'm going on all of these tangents and stuff. Kind of focusing on stuff because I'm just like, I feel like I'm focusing too much on one particular thing. I need to kind of spread out more. The fact of the matter is, I like the fact is that Class 7 is split up. And, like, obviously they're in 3 different regions. Like, you know, obviously you have Machias, Elliot, and Fee, and Celtic. And then God, who was in that? Oh, Gaius, Elisa, and Milliam in Nord, and then eventually Laura, Emma, and Eustace in Legram until Eustace leaves and goes back home to Bereahar, just because he heard about because the moment he heard what his dad did attacking Ymir, especially because he felt like, not only is that the home of one of my classmates and friends, the fact of the matter is, like, that's something like a noble shouldn't be doing something like that. 2, Ymir took him in, like, obviously that time in between, you know, like that I brought before, where the entire class went, he felt like they welcomed me with open arms, and for my dad to do something like that. So he went back home hoping that maybe he'd be able to kind of change the situation, especially because Rufus isn't around to kind of keep their father in check, because Rufus is all being the second in command to the Noble Alliance and everything. But I just like how, you know, also like Reen being like obviously the first person he runs into being Machias. I always talk about this. I like how it's interesting, like the people you get reunited with at different points in times. Like obviously the last person to join your party technically in Class 7 is technically Million, because she comes into the room last, but obviously her and Crow join at the same time. But in this one, you know, the last person to join Class 7 is, or reunited Class 7 is Eustace, you know. So I just, once again, I always say that's kind of interesting. I think it's also kind of neat that they actually make it so that Elliot is one of the earlier people you meet, simply because like Elliot and Gaius are the 2 people that you like clicked with first. It was, and they bring this up in 3 where it's like, oh yeah, like, you know, everyone kind of went their own way. Some people grouped up, but it's like at the beginning it was Reen, Elliot, and Gaius, you know, like they're kind of the first like best buds of Class 7, I'd say, before, you know, because I think everyone else eventually gets, you know, grows into relationships and stuff like that. But I feel like that trio is kind of where like that foundation started. You know, once again, Reen's always considered the center, you know, not necessarily, you know, he is technically the leader of Class 7, but more so than anything, he would never look at himself as the leader. He would never look at himself as the center either, but obviously that's based on what like Sarah told him, you know, it's like you're kind of the centerfold of Class 7. But going to the different regions, you know, obviously the battle, you know, the Noble Alliance kind of, you know, everyone being treated as traitors because of what happened to Osborne, and so higher up officials like, you know, Machias' dad being arrested, and they're like, oh, the royal family, like they're saying, oh, it's like, no, they're not. You've actually taken them hostage, but you're making it seem like, oh, maybe we haven't seen the royal family publicly, but maybe they're sick or something, like, you know, so they're, you know. And I thought it was kind of an interesting detail they bring up throughout over the course of the game, and you definitely can tell is when you read the Imperial Chronicle, it super leans to being like, oh yeah, the Noble Alliance, oh, victory after victory, oh, the Noble Alliance, they're so cool, they're so good. And even at one point you can read some stuff, they're like quotes from like interviews with Rufus and on a few occasions, and him kind of spinning things to a certain favor, look at a certain, you know, perspective, you know, making the Noble Alliance look like they're good guys and everything. But I just thought it's kind of a neat element of just, and you know, And it's a beautiful thing of just being reunited, everyone. Like, obviously, like, because they were all hoped that Ring was alive, but for them to actually meet him, because it's been an entire month, they never knew what happened to Ring. They hoped that he was okay, but they never knew for sure. And so for them all to be reunited, I also love, because it's like, obviously, this is your first time really getting to see them in not just casual clothes, but obviously a little more casual, because the entire first game, they're in their school uniforms. So probably person whose outfit I like the most is Ring's, because I don't know, I like the jacket and the boots, especially because the jacket's got a little bit of fur to it. I don't know why. I mean, it also makes sense, like, his outfit in general, because it represents, like, obviously the area he comes from, but it's like, I just like aesthetically, like, his outfit. Like, it's probably one of my favorites. It's actually kind of interesting. I didn't even notice this until I played played 2 through a second time. That Eustace's outfit in 2 is basically what Ring has. It's just a different color scheme. Because Eustace's is green. His jacket's green, but it's the same jacket that Ring wears in 3. You know, gloves and everything. So I was like, oh, like I said, it took me a while to notice that, but I saw Eustace in 2 when I was playing through it again. I was like, oh, that's the same outfit Ring wears. It's just a different color. I just thought that was, you know, just kind of an interesting element. Maybe that means something, maybe it doesn't. But regardless, something that I think aesthetically is kind of neat about this game too, in comparison to 1, is like, obviously you carry over your techniques and your S-crafts, but they get stronger. And I mean, not just stronger, but you get new S-crafts in this game. Once again, it's always an interesting thing about the fact is that Ring gets a new one at the end of every game. So like, he's like, some of the characters have ones they learned over the course of the game, whereas Ring learns his near the end of the game. That being like his termination slash, which is just, aesthetically, I just love that S-craft. It's, once again, I'm a sucker for like weapons like his, like swords, long swords like that, and just also like swords in general, but also just like his fighting style, and just like, I love that. Once again, I like the whole aspect of like each of his techniques transforming from like his autumn technique to his arc blade becoming true techniques, his Gale becoming Gale EX. And I've talked about it before, I love aesthetically how it is when he uses his spirit unification in comparison. That Arcane Gale is my favorite, just because and I think I might have mentioned this in 1, but if I didn't, I'll mention it here, and I think it's such a little aesthetic I never noticed until the second time through. If you compare Ring's Gale technique to normal, to how it looks when he uses his spirit unification, obviously this is something that it's more prevalent in 2. I feel like you can't really notice it as much I don't notice it as much in 3, so they might have changed this. But when Ring does it in 2, when he does it a normal Gale, he'll slash. There'll be like a second pause, he'll disappear, slashes, like he'll moves pretty fast. But when he's using his spirit unification form, when he's using his arcane Gale, he zips much faster, to the point you don't see that pause in between. It's boom, 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 boom. Whereas before it's like boom, 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 boom. Like it's such a little aesthetic thing, because Ring is much faster and much stronger in his spirit unification form, because even like stat wise your speed goes up. So for them to represent it in battle like that, by also making that technique come out faster, but also it's like, not only you slashing multiple times, you do that like final shockwave at the end, to me. And it's just like, that's like such a super powerful technique, because it's one of the few techniques that hits twice, because the only other character that has 2 hitting techniques is Sharon, because 2 of her S-craft techniques hit twice. 1 is basically like Ring's Arcane Gale, you know, she slashes at you, and then like she hits you with the while she was basically attacking you, she's hitting you with the strings, and then you get caught by those. So, and then the first one she has is that basically she draws you in and then she slash. So it's kind of interesting, because she's actually kind of a combination of Laura and Ring. Her second technique is kind of like Ring's Gale to a certain extent, the way it attacks twice. But then the first one is kind of like Laura's technique, where she draws you in and then attacks you. Just in her case, you know, Sharon attacks twice in both occasions, where Laura only attacks once. She sucks you in and then does a spin attack, so it's only technically 1 attack. Regardless, tangents and all that. And speaking of Sharon, I do love the fact is that obviously you get 3 extra characters in this game. I mean, technically you actually get more when you eventually get to like later parts of the game, because obviously eventually you get Toa, Angelica, Princess Alphen, as well as Elise, but that's like at the very end. But obviously like So at the beginning it's just Reen and Toval, and then eventually it's, you know, then eventually you get Claire, and then you get eventually Sharon. I've talked about this before. I've never stuck with one particular person throughout all three areas, like when you're reuniting all the class 7. So first, obviously the first time you go through when you meet up everyone in Celtic, you're with Toval. The second time through you can take Toval and leave Claire, but I always bring Claire. I did it both times through just because it's like, well, I know Milliam's going to be there, so that's why I do that. And also because it's like, also, you know, the third time through I bring Sharon because it's like, well, it's the only time you really get a chance to play Sharon. At least it presents an opportunity to play having Toval in your party 3 times. It's a potential to have Claire in your party twice. So, but also like that's also like that third time round is when you run into like McBurn and Duvalie. So it's very befitting, because even like McBurn looks at it as an opportunity to be like, oh, I get to face off against, you know, Sharon, you know, so. Which once again, I think I talked about that recently in another video. A video that I also think hasn't even come out yet, jeez, is where I'm referencing, like, I referenced the fact is, like, Duvalie, you can run into her randomly in Legram, and then, like, if Sharon's in your party, she won't say anything. And once again, I've never, obviously because I've only played it through twice, and I just never, maybe in future playthroughs I'll shift it around, or maybe I'll just look it up just to comparisons, but I'm curious, like, what some of the dialogue differences. Obviously there's going to be some big dialogue differences, probably not big, but more like character-based and a little more, minor, but not probably character-wise is going to be big, but probably like on a grand scale of things it's going to be very minor. But just the differences between like bringing Claire or Toval when it comes to facing off against McBurn, for example, and something like that. But once again, like, Sharon knows exactly who Duvalie is the moment you meet her in Legrand, but like I said, she just looks like a regular NPC. I mean, obviously she looks like a very specific NPC. They make a whole point to like give her a portrait and everything. Once again, she's just sitting there talking mad shit about the arts-aid school. She's like, look, Graham seems a little quaint and stuff like that, but because obviously it's like her illustrious lord is the best, and the arts-aid school has nothing compared to, you know, that whole, you know, Duvalie's whole thing. So I think that's all just kind of, you know, fascinating in the long run, being able to play all 3 of them, and obviously each one of them being very different fighting style. Like obviously Toval being renowned for being able to cast very fast. I mean, I even love that they make that an aesthetic and an aspect of his power, because he actually has an accessory. His was a quick caliber, which makes it so that he like doesn't decrease like his casting time by like a third, I think. Because I think that's kind of a neat element too. Like when you get to chapter 2, when you eventually separate from those 3, whoever you have a higher bonding link with will give you an item. Sharon's is kind of one of the best, especially if you want to go down the counselor route, and I always put Reen in that route. So it's like being able to like, you abuse, and that's such an awesome like aspect. I feel like 1 and 2 it's much stronger, because in 3 I feel like they made a point to nerf that. I mean, maybe there's a way to really buff it up, but just like the delays aren't as powerful in 3 as they are in 1 and 2, so you can really abuse the whole Chancellor strategy, where you basically are able to delay your enemies over and over again. It makes fights like trivial. Boss fights sometimes trivial, the way you're able to just delay an enemy almost indefinitely. Some of it's a little bit of luck, but also just if you have enough MP to quit on people, like, you know, especially people like Reen, and using his arc blade or a true arc blade, it knocks it, because that's the only technique of his that has an actual delay to it, which is interesting, because like I won't get into it, but it's just like, and it's just a whole thing. So like both times I played through, I got Sharon's. The reason why is because I didn't carry it, because like I said, I just did a normal playthrough, and obviously 1 and 2 you can only do limited stuff when you're going through multiple playthroughs, like of how much you can carry over. You only have 5 points. All I ever do is make sure, like each playthrough, I always wanted to be able to get the max number of bonding points. I always made a point of that. Like I think I would talk about that. I might not have brought that up in 1, but I felt the need to kind of bring that up in this case. But my second time through, I just played it on normal, and I just kept their their bonding links as well, levels, as well as being able to do all the bonding events is kind of just what I did. Because it's so interesting, because obviously, like, because you have less limited times to spend time with your characters, they give you a lot more bonding events. So there's points in the stories where it's like you have like a ridiculous amount of bonding points. I want to say like it's near the end of the game where you're kind of preparing to have bonding events with, no, it might even been like some of the times in your mirror and everything, because you're having talks of some, because there's instances in this game which hasn't even come up in 3. It doesn't come up in 3 either. Maybe it's going to be something that comes up in 4, but you can double, there's certain points in the game where you can double up on bonding events. Like, so like, for example, I know like Laura, like when she's in your party and you return to your mirror, like she has 2 bonding events like back to back. So it's just such an interesting thing. Like obviously you only need 1 to unlock the first one unlocks the page in her character profile, but the second one isn't, just an extra thing. But once again, I like being able to get all those story beats. That's why like I always take those as top priority, like in a New Game Plus. The whole reason why I was bringing that up is kind of explaining why I didn't have Sharon's item the second time through. I got it the first time through. I made sure, because I knew her item was really good and it would work really well on Reen. The fact of the matter is I made sure to get it the second time through as well, you know. So regardless, like I said, kind of went on a bit of a diatribe of all of that, but nevertheless, moving on. And since I'm brought up this whole conversation about bonding events, I kind of want to share some of my favorite ones. I love the whole Elisa and Reen thing, because there's the whole thing, obviously, like, you know, obviously when they get reunited and everybody's looking like, whoa. And I love that becomes more and more of a thing, because obviously it's a big thing in 3, but definitely it being a thing in 2, like her embracing him the way he did, and it's like, whoa. Damn, Elisa, and just she's embarrassed by like, oh, no, you know, whatever, you know. But also like the bonding of her first few bonding events are about the fact of the matter is when you're in your mirror, she's like, oh, actually, I came to your mirror before. And Reen's like, oh, really? She's like, yeah, I was super young. It was like a family vacation. She's like, it would have been so interesting if we actually knew each other. And then she remembers meeting a kid when she was younger. She's like, what the hell was that? She was like, did I forget that? And then later on, Reen's trying to make her feel better, because I think it was like at the time she was worried about her mom, because like word hadn't gotten out about what Arena's situation was after everything was said and done when the Civil War started. And Reen made her like a little bunny from snow, and he said he used to do the same thing to make Elise feel better. And then she's like, oh, that's sweet. And then Elisa remembers like, wait, this exact thing happened before. She's like, holy crap, it was you, that little boy I met all those years ago, that was you. And he was like, oh yeah, that does vaguely remind me. Basically, because that was also around the time like the whole thing went down with Elise, where I think it was from a lot of his younger years he blocked out, because like the trauma of like using his ogre power and how terrified it made Elise, he was scared to ever use that in front of her ever again. So any memories kind of associated with all that, he kind of ended up blocking out. So, but the fact of the matter is, it's like, holy crap, we did know each other. And I also love, like, she's whispering to herself, being like, actually, I am kind of happy to know that the boy back then was you. And Reen's like, what'd you say? And she's like, nothing. And she's like, I love how she does that thing where she was mutter stuff underneath her breath and then be like, oh, what'd you say? And she's like, nothing. And just blushes, and it's super adorable. There's actually another one I really like is Laura's. I think it's when you're in Rower, you find out she's super shitty when it comes to technology. Like you're in that store and there's the washing machine and there's the vacuum cleaner, and she messes them up. And the guy who's in the store, it's like every time she breaks something, he's like, ma'am. And it just gets more and more aggressive each time, and it's just like learning, you know, because she's this master at being a swordsmanship, but it's like she kind of falls through on some other areas. Because I think even the Viscount, you know, her dad ends up, you know, commenting on that when you get on the Courageous for the first time. He's like, you know, what's your relationship with my daughter? He's like, you know, because he's like, I think she's a little kind of like on the, you know, he's like, I think I might have gone too far with her training, because she's so focused on swordsmanship, she's kind of blind in other areas, you know, because obviously that led to the whole, like, you know, interesting relationship she had with Monica, just because that was something kind of like, she didn't really know how to handle that, because she's so got tunnel vision when it comes to swordsmanship to a certain extent. So I like that being a whole aspect of her character, just being shitty with technology. I just thought that was pretty dope. Now, there's one I thought was really interesting, and it's one of Sarah's when you're at Ymir, is that basically she wants to train with Reen, and partway through the training, like, you know, Reen's kind of on the losing end, and so he ends up pushing, and he ends up, I think, they don't really go as far as saying this, but basically it's like a little cutscene. You see him kind of use his gale because he vanishes and appears in front of Sarah. And Sarah, her instincts kind of kick in, and she does a powerful attack, and Ring kind of almost gets hurt. And then when it's all said and done, he's like, oh no, it's good. But then she kind of apologizes in her head. She's like, that is bad. I could have really hurt him. She's like, I guess, you know, I gotta confront stuff. Like, it's one of those things. Like, obviously this was my second time through. I saw this bonding event. I'm like, holy crap. I was like, that's insinuating her past as a Jaeger. You know, the fact of the matter is, it's like her Jaeger instincts kind of kicked in. And so, because I think at that time it already kind of started circulating about the Northern Jaegers being involved in the war and stuff like that. So I think all that kind of really hit her. So it was just kind of like she knew sooner or later she was going to have to be confronting her past. Because there's even one point, it's like, oh, there's Jaegers involved, and then Sarah wants to come along, and then Fee kind of happens to only be the only one that looks. And that's what I think is kind of an interesting thing, because I can say this now that we are on 2. That's why Sarah took such an interest in Fee. Not only because it's like, oh, she, you know, it's because she has a very similar story to Fee. She was a Jaeger back in the day. She was with the Northern Jaegers because she's originally from Northumbria. So obviously you get way more into that in 3, but it's actually like, obviously there's bonding events in 2, and I might have referenced this stuff when I was talking about 1 as well. Like, obviously she talks a little bit about, like I said, her past, like why like she's into the men that she's into. Once again, that gets expounded upon more in 3, but obviously it's like, once again, there's that bonding event in the end of one of her final bonding events in 1. I think it might be her last one, where she has that glass. She's like, oh yeah, like it was to pour out for somebody, and obviously that's connected to her Jaeger days, and you expound upon that more and more with each one of her ones. It's actually interesting because actually, like, a lot of her bonding events with you, like, there's at least 1 or 2 more, because like I think the one she has for you in Rower is also training as well. Like you face off against her, you know. So because at that point Reem was still holding back. He'd unlocked his spirit unification by then, but he still never used it really. He still kind of went all out, but he was still always holding himself back when it came to that, you know, front. So I just thought, like, that's another one that kind of sticks out to in my head. Another one that I really like is the one with Fee, and I think it's kind of an adorable one, when you were in Berea Hard, where she is on she's like, her boots are kind of messed up, and then you kind of give her a piggyback ride, and in that instance she kind of brings up the fact is that you remind her of the boss from, you know, the Jaeger King, from Zephyr. And the fact of the matter is, like, but then she says, like, she realizes it's like, I'm not going to be comparing apples to oranges. Like, my Jaeger family was my Jaeger family, but you guys are my family too. Like, and she ends up talking about this later on, which I thought was kind of, you know, a powerful moment when she's facing off against Zeno and Leo in the Infernal Castle, being like, yeah, the fact of the matter is, for so long she let other people protect her, but now she makes her own choices. You know, once again, that was the whole thing. That's the whole point Sarah wanted for her, was to not just let other people make decisions for her. She kind of got swayed by everything. Like, obviously when she became a part of Zephyr, she kind of went along with everything. So, but being a part of Class 7, she was able to kind of make her choices. She decided what her life was going to be, what she wanted it to be, you know. So take back, you know, wanting to take back everything that she lost. She'd already done it with Class 7, so she's planning on doing the same thing with getting answers about why Zeno and Leo, as well as the rest of Zephyr, left her behind, you know, and why, like, they left her in Purple Lightning, you know, Sarah's hands. It turns out that was their boss's final wish, that their boss also wanted Fee to have nothing to do with the Jaeger life, so he wanted her away from all of this as soon as possible anyway. So if he is like, when I die, get Fee as far away from this, you know. Hello, you wonderful people. I quickly wanted to interrupt this by letting you know I decided to divide these recordings up, just because just even editing this alone, I realized how long it was going to be, and rather than it just being a really long video, because part 1 to my Trails of Cold Steel 1 discussion was already fairly long, so I decided I didn't want it to be that long again, so I'm going to be cutting the future recordings up. So just wanted to let you know ahead of time. So this particular discussion is going to be ending here, and I will be, obviously you'll be getting the next part of the discussion hopefully soon enough.